So now I'd like to talk to you about decarboxylation and edibles. So first of all, what is decarboxylation? It's believed that in order to get the best effects from cannabis or from CBD, it must be decarboxylated. And to do this, it basically means that a carboxyl group is going to be lost from the key cannabinoids, detached, so to speak. And this will convert THCA to THC and CBDA to CBD. Now the THC will be more psychoactive, and CBD is said to be more active or more bioavailable also. Now this is accomplished by heating the cannabis. And if they were doing hemp, they would heat the hemp. And when you smoke or vape cannabis, you automatically heat it, and therefore it's done at this time. So for edibles, it has to be done by heating in the oven at low temperature. And there's different opinions as to what temperature or how long. So I came across 240 degrees Fahrenheit for 60 minutes, 250 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes, 200 degrees for 30 minutes. And when I did it, and this is going to sound really random, I did it at 220 degrees for 35 minutes. You're probably saying, well, why would you do that? Well, it's because I know my oven, and my oven tends to be a little slow. And so I usually, if a recipe, for example, the one that says 200 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes, I was doing 220 because I just find things work a little better when I'm a little higher temperature. And then I did 35 minutes instead of 30 just to be on the safe side to make sure that it was all done. Okay, so when you do this, you want to put the cannabis in an airtight oven-safe container. A mason jar will work. That's what I used. Not that particular mason jar, but I did use a mason jar. And I had buds like in the picture there, and I just stuck it in the oven and had it there for 35 minutes at 220. And it could be a casserole dish also with a heavy lid. And then what you want to do is completely cool it. And you want to do this quickly because this will maintain the phytonutrient properties better. So all I did was take it out of the jar within minutes of it coming out. Obviously I used something because it's quite hot, so I used something to, like a tea towel, to sort of turn the lid and deal with the jar. And I transferred it into a dish and put it in the freezer for a few minutes. And then it can be infused into the oil or the butter. Now, as you can see in the picture, these are buds, and you need it broken down into fine pieces. So I just broke it up with my hand, and I used a little rolling pin I have. It's actually a wooden dowel with a rounded edge, and I just mushed that, used it to mush the cannabis that was in the bowl after it had been cooled. And so it's kind of like a mortar and pestle, which you could also use. And there are grinding machines specific for cannabis that you can buy. You could put it into a blend, not a blender, but a coffee grinder. The downside to that is it might make it too fine. And remember, this is going to be strained out, and so depending on what you're using for straining, it might not remove all the herb from the oil when you're done. So I just broke it up with my hands and this little rolling pin. So it wasn't hard to do. And then, this is the same process you would use if you were making tinctures from alcohol. It has to be gotten to this stage and again broken up finely before you soak it in the alcohol as well. So once you've infused the oil, you probably are going to want to freeze it unless you're using it quickly, which is unlikely unless you're doing a lot of this and consuming a lot. And coconut oil is probably the best oil because it's the most stable. And it works pretty much in any recipe, whether you're baking or cooking. It's very stable at room temperature. It doesn't go rancid easily. You can keep it for months at room temperature and it doesn't go rancid. So it's a very, very stable oil. Ghee would also be good. So ghee is butter that's been clarified and the milk solids have been removed from the butter. So butter would also be very stable if it wasn't for those milk solids, because that's what makes it more prone to rancidity. Butter, of course, is the tastiest, but definitely needs to be frozen if that's what you use for infusing. Now, olive oil, avocado oil, walnut oil, these all work. Hazelnut oil, sunflower oil, especially if it's high oleic. They're not as stable because they're more prone to rancidity than, say, coconut oil or ghee. But again, if you're putting them in the refrigerator for a couple of weeks or freezing them, then they're fine as well. And they all have their own unique tastes, which you might like. And it also depends on what recipes you're using. But for most people, if they are using it for medicinal purposes, they're probably going to be doing it on a daily basis. So whatever one they use, they want to be able to use in multiple ways. So that's why I think coconut oil is probably best. Okay, so lecithin is something that can be added to the infused oil. And when you do this, it increases the absorption of THC and CBD and other cannabinoids. This is known as liposomal technique. Lecithin is what they use if they're creating liposomal supplements. You may have seen those. And liposomal is more, that's why people do it, is to make it more absorbable. It has to do with the fact that lecithin has both a fat component and a water component, or a water philic or a fat philic, if you want to put it that way, component. And as a result, for fat-soluble cannabinoids, it helps them be more absorbable because the water-soluble is easier to absorb. So it's kind of an interesting little thing that you can do. It's true for all nutrients. This is something you can do for all nutrients. You can throw it into your smoothies if you like. Make sure it's non-GMO lecithin, and you may not like the taste. So that's the one thing you need to be aware of. If the recipe was 1 cup cannabis with 1 cup oil, a tablespoon of lecithin would be an appropriate amount. But you can do as little as a teaspoon because you don't like the taste. Hopefully whatever you're putting it in doesn't matter. Okay, so when you are infusing, these are 3 different combinations I found. 1 cup cannabis to 1 cup oil to 1 tablespoon lecithin, or 17 to 14 grams for 1 cup of oil or butter and 1 tablespoon lecithin. Or you can do 28 grams, 1 ounce, for 454 grams, or 1 pound of oil or butter, and 1 tablespoon lecithin. Now, I highly recommend the lecithin granules. That's what the picture was on the previous page. They're much easier to work with, and if you ever see the liquid stuff, it's horrible because it sticks to your finger and it's really hard to wash off. Think about an egg yolk. An egg yolk has a lot of lecithin in it, and that's why it sticks to your hand and it doesn't wash off easily. So I highly recommend the lecithin granules, and they're quite easy to find. Now, there's different methods of infusion. You can use the stove, where you basically mix the ingredients in a saucepan, put it on the lowest temperature, so the lowest setting on the stove, for about 30 minutes. If you want to know the exact degree temperature, it's around 160. That's ideal. And if you have a little thermometer, you can measure the temperature and see if it's around 160. You can use a crock pot. Mix the ingredients in the crock pot and put it on the lowest setting for 4 to 8 hours. And you can also buy machines that do it. So there's one called Magical Butter. I actually bought that one. It's around 175 Canadian. Then there's the level 1, which is around 199 Canadian. And then there's the level 2, which also does decarboxylation, and it's around $300 to $400 So it's much more expensive. But this is something you can, that's the level 2 that's in the picture there. But this is something you can do if you think you're going to be infusing a lot of herbs, or it's something you can recommend to the client if they are going to be doing this on an ongoing basis. I got it because I want to play with infusing different herbs, not cannabis. And so I thought this was an easy thing to do, and then I know it's always being done right. And any herb can be infused with these methods. As a matter of fact, on the Levo site, they actually have a little calculator, and it tells you what herb, like rosemary or sage or cannabis or whatever, and what temperature and how long. I thought that was kind of cool. Okay, so once it's done, you're going to strain it through preferably a nut bag. You can use cheesecloth, but a nut bag is better at getting things out and straining things properly. And then you'll refrigerate it for a couple of weeks or freeze it for longer storage depending on what you're using it for. Okay, so now it's ready for using in recipes. And it can be used in any recipe where oil or butter is used. So it literally, if it calls for half a cup of butter, you can put half a cup of infused oil. It's that simple. Or you can mix it, or you use a 1/4 cup of infused oil and a 1/4 cup of regular butter, or whatever oil you're using. Now, and this is all going to be about, we're going to talk about milligram strength. It's all about how much you want and how to control the milligram strength for the portion size that you have. So basically, if you can make something with this that does have portion controls, this is why a lot of people make chocolates or candies, and then you can make small portions, then you have a way of getting a consistent amount every time. Otherwise, there's no consistency to the dosage. So if you're using it in meals, like soups, or you can use it in anything, like I said, anywhere fat is used, you can use it. But if it's not something where you can kind of divide it up evenly, you're not going to get a consistent dose. And if the purpose is medicinal, then that's something you have to think about. If the purpose is for high, that's a whole other story, but that's not why we're here. So if it's for medicinal purposes, getting a sense of what is going to be the correct amount for the effect the person needs for their health issue, and at the same time being able to do this consistently is critical. Now, a scale would be helpful for this, making it easier for equal portions to occur. So let's look at an example of a cookie, right? So first of all, you would use a scale to weigh out the raw cookie dough before baking each cookie. So that way you at least know that each cookie has a certain milligram strength. Then, let's say you don't want to eat the whole cookie. Maybe you're trying to go slow, or you're microdosing, or something like that. Then what you want to do is measure how much of the cookie you're consuming. So let's say you wanted 1/4 of the cookie. You need to put the cookie on the scale, divide it in 4, and make sure you eat 1/4 of that cookie. And you've got the scale there to tell you that that's what you're doing. And these scales are not expensive. They're easily found at restaurant food supply places. They're little digital scales, and they run on a battery, or they can be plugged in, or you can get them on Amazon. They're very inexpensive. I wouldn't get one of those little scales with the little dish on them. They're not accurate enough. You do want a digital scale. And by the way, there are marijuana scales that go and weigh much more sensitively than to the gram. But for the purposes of food, weighing to the single gram is best. I would recommend that people, when they're doing this, they not start with the whole cookie until they're aware of how it's going to affect them. And obviously, consuming a smaller portion allows people to observe reactions to see if it is enough. So again, if the purpose is not to be high, if the purpose is for medicinal purposes, then of course you want to make sure that what they are experiencing is the maximum they need for the health benefits they're seeking, right? And they're only going to do this by starting a little slower and working up than just, you know, dumping in some infused oil and then they get high and then they don't really know anything. So slow is better, small is better, and then work to where it's the best reaction for their health issues and the least amount of negative reactions they don't want for their you know, day-to-day existence. Okay, now remember, edibles take longer to feel a reaction for edibles, than smoking or vaping does, but the effect is going to last longer, so wait 2 hours before a second dose if nothing is felt. Now, microdosing, which is something that's becoming quite popular, is maybe more effective for their goals. So what microdosing does, which is about 2 or 3 milligrams every 2 hours, is give you a better long-term effect because you're going to have the effect ongoing, but it's small amounts and therefore you won't have the side effects. Plus, you'll use less and save money. So basically, when you want to microdose, you want to choose a recipe that allows you to do this easily. Again, chocolates are a really good example of something because you can make little squares of chocolates with 2 to 3 milligrams in them. It's not a difficult thing to do. So first of all, if you are trying to figure out the dosage, you need to buy a strain where the seller can tell you the percentage of THC and preferably CBD that is present. And then when you have picked a strain and you know what its percentage is, you want to use it consistently so that you're always getting the same amount. Now let's say the THC content in the strain that's purchased is 10%. Well, there's, as you may or may not know, 1 gram equals 1,000 milligrams of anything. It doesn't matter what it is. So 10% of 1,000 milligrams is 100. So for every gram, if the THC content is 10%, you'll have 100 milligrams of THC. So that's 1 gram equals 100 milligrams of THC. If it's 20%, then you'll have 200 milligrams per gram of of cannabis. And if it's 25%, then you're going to have 250 milligrams per gram of cannabis, whole plant, right? Okay, now this is a site, this is actually one that my niece goes to buy from, and you can see this is a strain that she bought, and if you look up in the top right corner, it tells you how much THC. This one has, it's 33%, and this one has 0. It tells you the type, it's indica, and then it tells you when you should use it, which is at night, right? Because indica is the one that makes you more drowsy and sleepy and stuff. And then here, it gives you some of the basics that it's going to help with loss of appetite, anxiety, pain, will make you euphoric, relaxed, and sedated, okay? So maybe that's what you're looking for, and now you have all the information. And this particular site, it's actually, I cut it off when I did the screenshot here, but actually they have it so that you can go to the home page, you can pick what type, if you want indica or sativa or a combination, and then you can tick off what percentage THC you want, what percentage CBD, and it will go through the site and give you the strains that fall into those criteria. So that's pretty cool. That's very helpful to get some consistency. Plus, they also will tell you where there's a location near you for you to purchase it. So that's really nice. Okay, so let's look at some examples here from a dosing perspective. Let's say we chose that one, a recipe for infusing that was 1 ounce or 28 grams for 1 pound or 450 grams of oil, could be butter, whatever. And let's say that strain that was used or is being used is 10% THC cannabis. So you would have, remember we said there's 100 milligrams per gram. So you're using 28 grams, it'll be 28 times 100, which is 2,800 milligrams per pound of oil, or 454 grams of oil or butter. Again, if it was 20%, you just double it, it's 5,600 milligrams. Now, a pound has 2 cups. So if a recipe calls for half a cup, that means there's 4 half cups in 2 cups. So you're going to be using a quarter of this amount, and therefore the recipe is going to have 700 milligrams. I hope you like doing that. And then if you want a microdose, well, a microdose is 2 milligrams or 3 milligrams. That's what's considered a microdose. The recipe would have to be divided into 350 pieces for 2 milligrams, or 233 pieces for 3 milligrams. Now, that's not realistic. It's very hard to cut a brownie into 233 pieces. It's not impossible, but you're basically going to have crumbs. That may not be consistent enough. If we look at the recipe that called for 7 to 14 grams of cannabis for 1 cup of oil, that's a little more doable if we go with the 7 grams, because basically 14 grams for 1 cup is the same as 28 grams for 2 cups. So again, we have our 2 cups, 1 pound, 454 grams. And at 10%, 14 grams is 1,400 milligrams per pound, or 454 grams for the oil. And if half a cup was called for in a recipe, then it's 350 milligrams for the entire recipe is what will be present. Now, if you want a 3 milligram portion, then you divide 350 by 3, you get 116 portions. If you want 2 milligram portions, you would divide 350 by 2, which is 175 portions. It's still kind of hard to do. Let's say the brownie recipe the recipe was a brownie, and you baked it in an 8x8 pan. You would have to, in order to get 116 pieces for your 3 gram, you'd have to cut it into 120 pieces. Now, that's not impossible. That's 10 strips one way and then 12 strips the other, and that gives you 120 portions. Still not great, but it's a little more doable. And it's important to understand that portion size is about what the person can tolerate. The lower their endocannabinoid function, the more likely they can tolerate a bigger amount or need a bigger amount to help with their issues. But this is also why small doing it small at first is best, because there's no way to know for any given person. And so to get around this and have bigger pieces but at a microdose level, what you want to do is use less infused oil in the recipe. So again, if we're looking at our brownie recipe and it's calling for half a cup of oil or butter, then use an 1/8 or a 1/4 of a cup. And the brownie piece will be bigger and it's easier to cut, right? So for the previous brownie recipe for 3 milligrams, if it was a 1/4 cup of infused oil plus a 1/4 cup of the regular butter or oil or whatever you're using, you're going to end up with 58 portions that you need to have for the whole brownie. And that's a simple cut it by 6 one way and 10 by another. This picture over here is 72 pieces. I don't even think that's the whole brownie. I think they've missed a row here. But what you're seeing there, you can see that's what 72 looks like. That's not too bad, right? So 58, that's very doable. And that's maybe what you have to do if you're not doing something that has little small individual portions like a chocolate would. Like some kind of mold that you would just pour it into and it would give you individualized portions. But so it's easy to work with. You just have to figure out what the milligram strength is that the person requires. the other option, and the other benefit of this, and this is why I like it. So let's say they start with 3 milligrams as microdosing, but it's not quite enough, and maybe then they want to try 6. Well, they just have to eat 2 pieces instead of 1. You don't have to make something new. You don't have to try again, right? They can figure it out just by the number of pieces they have, because each piece is about 3 milligrams. Now, another easy solution is to use the infused oil as is. So, for example, the 14-gram recipe in 2 cups. So for 2 cups, you have 72 teaspoons. 14 milligrams divided by 72 is 19.44 milligrams per teaspoon. So if you took 1/8 of a teaspoon, and there's 1/8 of a teaspoon measuring spoon, so that's not a problem, you would have 2.43 milligrams per 1/8 teaspoon. That's really doable. So you could just like take 1/8 of a teaspoon, you know, and eat it right off the spoon, right? That's simple. It's hard to do if you're carrying it around with you at work and you're trying to do it every 2 hours. It's still doable. Take the teaspoon with you. Take the container with you. It's also very suitable this way for throwing in a smoothie. And maybe you want 19 milligrams. You could put a full teaspoon easily into a smoothie. If you wanted more, and I'm not saying you do, and I'm not saying that wouldn't get you high, I'm just saying we don't know what the person's going to need. You know, they can put a tablespoon in a smoothie. But for microdosing, it's not hard. 1/8 of a teaspoon is nothing. It's very easy to do. And as I said, it works for large amounts too. So whatever you want is good. Now, in terms of infusing other herbs, the first question I thought up is I wonder if they need to be decarboxylated too. It seems strange to me that all herbs, most culinary herbs, are heated. So there has to be something to do with the properties that are beneficial. Our ancestors heated herbs. They put them in things that were all warm, generally speaking. But it's not being discussed. I couldn't find any information on it, so I'll just kind of leave that out there for future, and maybe we'll hear something one way or another. And when you infuse herbs, you can do it with a hot or cold method. So the hot method is exactly the same as what we've described here, with either using a stove or a machine or a crock pot. Cold infusion takes much longer because you're literally sitting the herb in the oil, and you do that for 24 hours, and then, of course, you strain it out. It's the same situation as with the other hot infusion method. Now, there is some research that shows that many phytonutrient compounds are higher when herbs are cooked. So heating is not a bad thing from a nutrient perspective, especially these phytonutrients, which tend to be the ones that are important for helping the endocannabinoid system. So there's many herbs that are beneficial for the endocannabinoid system for different reasons. Some are phytocannabinoids, some are terpenes or terpenoids, some are just act in a certain way to support, say, omega-3 absorption, which helps with or omega-3 utilization, which helps with the whole endocannabinoid system, or, you know, there's various reasons why there's phytonutrients in the herbs that help the endocannabinoid system. So infusing is a good thing, but the good news is that many of these are more higher in numbers when they're heated. And this is not the first time I've seen research that shows that heating actually does not destroy phytonutrients, but increases them. It's not all phytonutrients. Some are water soluble and are lost in cooking, but many of them are not. And so it just depends what the person is looking to accomplish. Now, to make life easier, there's also topicals. I thought I would throw this in here even though they're not edibles. But if you were making topicals, you would do the same decarboxylation process and the same infusing of the oil. You were just using the oil in the topical. So often they mix this with beeswax, so it's creamier and easier to make it, rub it into the skin or whatever you're using it for. And you can also use essential oils in there to have a nice aroma. You can put eucalyptus in there, which is very typical for things for joints. You could also put in other essential oils like clove or helichrysum or cinnamon. These are all have benefits for the endocannabinoid system, so you can enhance the topical for it to be even more beneficial. The problem is it's not going through the digestive process, and we don't know how much that plays a role in how edibles work. So there has to be a reason why the edibles can have a stronger effect and last longer than smoking or vaping. We know the reason they take longer to take effect is because they're going through the digestive process. But we do know that gut bacteria often acts on phytonutrients and creates new metabolites. And maybe these metabolites that are created are in the cannabis may be playing a role as to why the effect lasts longer. We don't know. We don't know. I looked. There's just nobody's talking about it yet. We do know that part of the process for edibles is also what happens in the liver. So the liver does also create metabolites that are more psychoactive, and therefore the effect can be bigger for an edible and last longer because of the liver as well. So there's a lot going on with the digestive process with an edible that would not be happening with a topical. And there's also, there's people who believe that it does not make it into the bloodstream. So it's only going to be on the first few layers of skin that it's going to have an effect. So again, topical is topical. And it takes 10 to 15 minutes to feel an effect, and it may last 2 to 3 hours. Now, lecithin can be added to increase the transdermal action to get it possibly into the bloodstream. Because again, as I mentioned earlier with lecithin, it has the fat-soluble part and the water-soluble part. And this is what makes it liposomal and makes it aid in absorption. So it could aid the absorption into the bloodstream. There's no proof of it, but let's just say someone used a topical, and it would depend how potent it is. It would have to be fairly potent. And when I made the topical, I kept it quite low. I was going with the 7 gram per cup amount but the strain had 33% THC. But it still is quite low. And when I've looked at some of the topicals online, they are as high as 250 milligrams. So perhaps that's why they're higher, because in order to get any kind of effect, that's what they're doing. I don't say that they're made with less than. I don't know. I'd have to read the label. But I'm just saying, these are the considerations. It seems that with topical, you can get away with having a much higher milligram strength than you can when you ingest. There is a lot more research needed about this, but, we'll find out more. Now, CBD does absorb 10 times better through the skin than THC, but it still doesn't mean it meets the bloodstream. And topicals are generally recommended for local pain, itching, temperature, and inflammation. There are no human studies at this time, so we don't really know what's working, but there are products out there and people can try them and see what happens. The problem we are facing with this whole topic is there are so many options. There are so many products coming out, especially in the edibles, but there's even supplements. We talked about the topicals. There are candies. There are chocolates. It's just huge amount of choices. Now, this website, Stash Club, actually is a very good site because it has everything, and they tell you the milligram strength. So whether it's the cannabis, the topicals, the capsules, you can buy with knowing what milligram strength you're getting. So that's really, really good. So the key for anyone is using this cannabis is to find the right amount and in the best format for them. That's all you can do. The same is true for CBD. Even though it's not going to give them the high, it has benefits, and but it may not be enough for the person who's taking it, and they don't want to be wasting their money. And understanding what helps the endocannabinoid system naturally can lower the amount needed. So this is one of the places where our scope of practice now comes in. We can't recommend cannabis, but we can help their system function better. So we can look at how the gut functions, we can look at the liver, we can recommend many of the foods that I have created here, or I have put here in how to boost the endocannabinoid system naturally. And in doing that, it might lower the amount, or in some cases, they may not need this at all. So there's lots we can do. So I hope that helps.